We can see the detrimental effect on the central nervous system. We see three-dimensional EEGs that change when you just pass a mobile phone tower. There was just a very, very impressive study released in Germany about 5G mobile phone towers, and you can see the entire brain lighting up if you pass a 5G mobile tower. And in fact, if you have a mobile phone that is with 5G standard, you can see that as well.
Hi everyone, this is Veronica Kirilenko of the New American Magazine. Technology, being the practical application of scientific knowledge, is presumably aimed at improving human life. Considered scientific fiction just decades ago, all sorts of electronic and other devices are driving economic growth and making our everyday lives easier, which, however, comes with a price. And that price is apparently our own health and well-being. Luckily, there is a better way. Today, I'm delighted to speak with Dr. Christof Plothe of Germany, who spent decades researching the topic of electromagnetic fields and their impacts on human health. Christof is a member of the steering committee of the World Council for Health, which is holding its second annual conference, The Better Way, in Bath, UK, in early June. Christof, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Veronica. Yep.
Absolutely.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you very much. Christof, the technosphere is expanding at breakneck speed. We're surrounded by all sorts of devices and consider it a nightmare to leave our cell phone at home when going out. And at a societal level, it's hard to name an industry which would not rely on computers, high-speed internet, electronic equipment, and so on. So our electric helpers, of course, create electromagnetic fields, but so does the sun. So please explain how natural and artificial electromagnetic fields differ.
Well, if you think about the nature of artificial radiation, you have to go back into the States where Edison put up the first light bulbs in New York in order to get electricity in the houses, so we didn't have to depend on toxic gas fumes in order to lighten our cities. And right from the beginning, there was a great enthusiasm, like that was with the mobile phones when they were introduced. And that was only in the 80s. It's not that far away, actually, that, as you said, nobody can imagine a life without it anymore. In fact, I could sometimes consider it as the second brain of people. If you get into a conversation and you have a question and everybody starts checking in the internet for it, everything you don't have to store yourself, you just store in the World Wide Web now. Now we have artificial intelligence. That's a completely different topic on its own, how we can now easily rely to put parts of our brain into, in old days we called it collective consciousness, now we call it into the cloud of information out there. But there was a great enthusiasm that we could light up a city without all the other problems. And there was a huge struggle at that time between DC and AC current, and we know who won. And in fact, all this already created the first influence on human and life forms at that time, because electromagnetic fields is what our body uses in order to communicate. We are an electromagnetic body. I mean, if we have a heartbeat that we want to control, we get an ECG. If we want to see how our nerves in the brain are doing, we get an EEG, and we can go on. We can measure muscle tone with these devices. But if we go even further down into the cells, every little mechanism down there is controlled not only biochemically, and that is a huge, huge thing to talk about, because science has taught us, first of all, that we study mostly at a dead object. We dissect it in medicine and we look at what's there. So we don't observe the live body. And the next thing is we isolate a certain aspect. And then the third one is we actually look on a biochemical level. But as we just said, everything is basically controlled by electricity. the mitochondria, the powerhouses, they're called the little subunits of a cell, they work with a very fine gradient of electricity. And if you imagine these currents that are in there, they're only a fraction of what we're being exposed to. So we were talking about, when we first got into contact, what to talk about, we talked about high frequencies, mobile phones, 3G, 4G, 5G, but in fact, even the electromagnetic fields from even the cable or the socket in your wall are a few thousand times bigger than the currents that regulate your body. I mean, it's 90 millivolts at a synapse from one nerve cell to the next one. And if you lie next to a socket or to a light at your bedside, you are usually exposed to a few hundred volts, not millivolts. And then people have difficulty sleeping, or they get up in the morning, are really achy and stiff. And in fact, about 90% of the medical problems that I'm encountering at the moment, where people wake up and they feel stiff, or they have dizziness or a headache or whatever, are nowadays linked to electromagnetic pollution in their sleeping room. So whether they have their mobile phone next to them, whether they have a cable next to their head, whatever. We adopted these amazing technologies without questioning their effect on the environment. Yeah, so never a light bulb was studied what its effect is on our body by just observing even the power line to it. Never mind the different frequencies that we do have in all the different light modalities that we use nowadays. I mean, we started with an electric light bulb. That's also electromagnetic frequency. Then we went into other technology, energy-saving light bulbs. Then we went into LED, and we reduced and transformed the frequencies that are we exposed to. And if you look at LEDs that we now have everywhere in order to save energy, they are in the blue spectrum, which is a very, very small of the if you remember the experiment in our school where you had a sun and a little prism and you had the sun shining through it and you could see all the colors, this is what light from the sun is actually what it actually consists of. It's not just white, it's all the colors. And we actually know more and more every day about the importance of all these different fractions of light. If you imagine you have a winter blues, you can nowadays get a full spectrum light bulb in order to get all the spectrum of the sun back into your rooms. But this is one of the things I'm going to be talking about at the conference, that every little frequency out there in nature has effects on our system. And this is light, this is electricity, this is frequencies from space. In our stratosphere, we know about the Schumann frequency. We know about all the frequency of the Earth magnetic fields. And in fact, it's interacting with magnetic fields from the sun. We're just there to see how much they affect us. And in fact, the easiest way we could see how they affect us is that when we had people that were cut off these frequencies. Yeah, so we had basically non-existent research on the detrimental effects of everything that we introduced artificially. But we didn't have the knowledge to see how powerful, because we got used to, I mean, that's what we lived with all our lives, in all those centuries and in fact, millions of years from our ancestry. And only when we went into space and astronauts were up there and they felt very, very sick and nobody knew why, they actually looked at the exposure that usually our stratosphere protects us from, because that's why it's so useful not to have an ozone hole in our ozone layer, because that protects us from the harmful radiation. But there are beneficial radiations, and the US people that went on with their spaceships, by the way, they got very sick after a few weeks and had problems getting back adjusted when coming back to Earth, whilst the Russians had recognized that quite early, and they had little devices in order to introduce the frequencies that we are surrounded on planet Earth into their space stations, and they didn't get ill at all. So that's how it all started. That was 60s, 70s, that we started to see, whoa, there are effects that are not very good for us of the artificial radiation that we introduced. And there are other things that are very, very good. In fact, they're essential for life.
So what's the mechanism of those detrimental impacts of the electronic devices like cell phones, computers, etc., on our health? What's the latest science on that?
Veronica, we're now at a stage where we have over 40,000 studies proving the detrimental effect of all these frequencies. 40,000.
Okay.
So I was telling you that I was working with Professor Hecht, who was a beautiful human being and a specialist when it came to electromagnetic radiation. He worked actually for the space agencies. He worked for the German government, and he collected all the data that at that point, because the Russians were always much, much further than we are. Their safety limits are about 1,000 times, sometimes even higher, lower than it is in the US. And you can see in all countries that have different science out, you can see different restrictions of all of this. In fact, if you look at Russia and China at the moment, China and Russia have banned Wi-Fi and mobile phones from children at school because they found out how detrimental it is to their health. So not only to distract, but we can talk about all these effects right after this. But he found out that and had a report, Professor Hecht, that is, of a few hundred pages that basically said, don't introduce it because that the effects are too detrimental for nature and for human health. That was in the 80s. And this report just was never handed over to the government and never mind to the media. And then they started to safety test, and the standard, you believe it or not, is still the same than in the 80s, and it's just a few monkeys and a few rats. And they looked at if you put a mobile phone frequency next to them for about 6 to 8 minutes to see whether it warms up or not. So it's purely thermal, and this is all that there is in order to assess the safety levels of it.
And how does it impact an organism?
We have influences on almost all systems by now. We can see the detrimental effect on the central nervous system. We see three-dimensional EEGs that change when you just pass a mobile phone tower. There was just a very, very impressive study released in Germany about 5G mobile phone towers, and you can see the entire brain lighting up if you pass a 5G mobile tower. And in fact, if you have a mobile phone that is with 5G standard, you can see that as well. You can look at the pictures later. I can send them to you. They're highly impressive. They work on the calcium channels, which basically regulate all membranes in the body. They lead to thermal effects, but this is really only secondary because we can see an interruption of glucose uptake at the site, for example, where you use your mobile phone. Maybe you've realized that your concentration goes down when you used wireless technology for a while, or you get a headache. That's because not enough glucose is being taken up. We can see the effect on the heart. We can see the effect on the immune system. We can see the effect on just oxidative stress. All studies that were done, there are quite a few hundred, showed influences, and 93% of them showed clear evidence that it creates oxidative stress. And what we, for example, use in order to assess the amount of exposure, I can describe you what we do with our patients in order to assess this, because there are clear signs, and all viewers can do that for themselves in order to judge how big the exposure from it was. We measure a few things in the blood. One of them is a pro-inflammatory cytokine. It's interleukin 6. So that's a measure that's an inflammatory marker. And we know through studies that this is highly marked. This becomes extremely relevant if you have an infection. For example, interleukin 6 was one of the main denominators for the progression of COVID-19. So there were many rumors that there was no signs of any interaction between the two. But if you have a mobile phone or Wi-Fi in your room, you get the infection, and then you have a raised interleukin 6, and interleukin 6 is the main marker. If you go into hospital to see the severity of the disease, it becomes quite crazy. So we know all of this, and One of the easiest ways, because there's one professor in Germany who has done a study on Wi-Fi, and he puts people in a Faraday cage and then measures the influence on the heart, on the brain, on muscle tone, and circulation. And behind the back of the people that he studies, he puts on a Wi-Fi and turns it off. And so without knowing of the people, you will have the changes in muscle tone, you will have the changes in the EEG, you will have the changes in the ECG. And some EEGs look like they were about to have an epileptic fit with just a normal Wi-Fi. And other people, he told me of a case in which he had an asystole, so no heartbeat at all for 6 seconds after the Wi-Fi was turned on. So we have an influx of all these arrhythmias everywhere here in Europe. I'm not up to date about the actual stats for the US, but we have all these problems of seemingly unrelated symptoms, but when you take people away from this technology and create safer and better alternatives for it, because it doesn't mean nowadays to restrict all of it. I don't have a mobile phone. I'm convinced it's not good for my health. And I live. I do live in our modern time, but I know many people wouldn't be able to do that. But when we see patients in nowadays, and I can tell you, Veronica, I mean, I've been treating people for 30 years. The first thing now I observe in people is, first of all, as an osteopath, you have the tissues in the body opening and closing to about 6 to 8 times per minute. So I start assessing people in terms of their vitality. How is the expression of their tissues? And this is the one thing that about 30 years ago, the tissues were opening like this, and now they're just like that. They're just fluctuating like this. And you can see the increase in muscle tone. So I go and assess the movement of their arms, the movement of their hips. And maybe the normal teenager nowadays has maybe 20, 30 degrees of opening up their hips and sometimes of their shoulders. They're completely stiff.
Yeah, let's talk about children for a bit, because it's known that growing cells are more susceptible to radiation, whether it's low or high frequency. Would you say that children are at increased risk from harmful exposure to artificial EMFs?
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, in China, if you're pregnant, you're supposed to wear a protective gown in order to protect it from mobile phone exposure, because there's not the protection of the brain like our skull that as an adult we have. And we can see the pictures, even with the thermal effect, when you have a mobile phone next to a baby, an adolescent, or an adult, it penetrates completely differently into the brain. In a child, you will have the entire brain lightening up. Yeah. In an adult, maybe only a third. But this is only one aspect of it. The other is that, of course, we have important developmental windows for babies and for children, and we can see the effect. We just look at the fact that we have so many neurodevelopmental problems nowadays, and you know very well there are many reasons nowadays why we created such a toxic environment. Why we do have this. I can only say in the practice, a huge aspect of that is electromagnetic radiation, the Wi-Fi in the room of the children, their electronic toys, and all of that. You see sleeping disturbances, you see muscle contraction. I was talking to a colleague today. We are observing children that lie on our benches when we examine them, and they have twitches and contractions all over their body, literally like they're having like a small fits. And this has become the normal. You observe children, sometimes you have to look a bit closer, but you have little contractions, almost we call them medically fasciculations into the body, and their entire body is twitching. So can you imagine what a power you need in order to create such physiological changes and what that will mean for their future? And as I said, I haven't published anything on this, but when you take away all the electronic devices out of their rooms, go to cable-bound alternatives, all this ceases. Yeah, it stops. So,
yeah, doctor, let's focus on the role of natural frequencies in our health and well-being. When we spoke offline, you brought up the topic of the effects of negative and positive ions. So knowing how harmful the artificial radiation is. So please elaborate, please tell us more.
I mean, there's one thing that we changed our lifestyle from being mostly outside to being nowadays mostly indoors. I mean, if you go into Asia, people don't even see the light anymore in many countries. And you can go in the afternoons into the streets and you hardly see any child still playing outside. They're mostly indoors. So we have two aspects why this is lowering their vitality. I mean, you probably heard of many people being extremely tired all the time. Yeah. And you also know that when we have a holiday, we tend to go at the beach, we tend to go into the mountains, into the refresh, and we do feel better afterwards. We don't ask ourselves why, but if we have all these detrimental effects of the artificial radiation that we have imposed indoors, they did these experiments where they cut off people. There are over 400 experiments being done in one university in Germany alone, where they cut off people all the natural frequencies. They put them into cages, and they disconnected them from the Schumann frequencies, which is a frequency about 7 to 12 hertz that's in our stratosphere all the time because of all the lightnings on this planet. And we now know that this is a very essential part of life. So they did this, and people felt after a few hours very, very sick. The problem there, Veronica, is that this frequency, the 7 to 12 hertz, is basically on average 10 hertz. That's also the frequency of Wi-Fi. That's why Wi-Fi is actually an extremely harmful frequency that we have, because also in this frequency range is where our alpha waves in the brain act. So alpha waves, if you look at an EEG, you have different alpha, beta, theta waves that are for different states. In the ones you sleep, in the other one you're alert. And alpha waves is the one where you're relaxed but alert. So in exactly this frequency, you have an artificially pulsed frequency that enters your brain and alters your entire brain function. So you can concentrate less, you feel a little bit more irritated, you feel a little bit more tired because of the oxidative stress. So one thing that I realized, though, was even when people were exposed to, because who isn't in a world of today, to all these artificial radiations, the more time they spent outdoors, the less symptoms they had. And this is starting with the symptom that I said, with the twitching and itching and the contraction of their muscles and the concentration, headaches, lack of sleep, and other things. But some people, when they were going camping, hiking, or one patient that struck me, she went to Iceland and spent the time out there. It was just volcanoes, the sea, very powerful nature. She got rid of all of her symptoms for about 2 weeks. And that's another thing, whilst most people say, well, I'm not aware of any problems in terms of electromagnetic sensitivity. Well, the official number is 3 to 6% of people do have almost allergy-like reactions with many systems in their body to it. But the official number is probably not right, because if you talk more in detail about people, how they feel during the day, I would calculate, and many people do that as well, to about 30%. 30% do feel when we're exposed to these artificial fields. And so one thing was that I realized the more you are out in nature, then less you're affected. But another aspect is that this professor that I was talking about in Berlin, Professor von Klitzing, that is, he realized that once you're in a Wi-Fi field and your body starts to pulsate in this 10 hertz frequency, that's 2.4 gigahertz, that's 10 hertz frequency, you can, after an exposure of only about half an hour, you can still measure it in the body after 48 hours. So it's like you take a glass, dong, yeah, and you get the resonance, and it keeps on vibrating in that resonance. So even if then you don't expose yourself to it, your body is still resonating. That's why we need to get people out of the resonance with it. And that's why, for example, we use tuning forks. You get tuning forks with a low frequency onto your body. And it's like decoupling the effect because, as I said, you can still measure it. So you get a frequency that is different, much lower, and then more powerful into the system, and you resonate out of your body. So we just put it on the head, on the chest, on the hip bone, on the knees. And people immediately start to feel much, much better. Mostly they're very relaxed straight away. And you can measure it in their tissues that they stop vibrating in this frequency. And the other one is just getting out and earthing yourself. You were just talking about the negative ions. We are basically a battery, and we charge up with negative ions. So this feeling after a thunderstorm, yeah, remember when it really, there's lightning and thunder everywhere, and everything feels charged. This is negative ions in the air, and you literally feel more invigorated afterwards. And in fact, the opposite can happen if you have a storm, because in a storm, all the negative ions are blown off you. That's why you feel very exhausted. Or you're driving a convertible, you're very exhausted afterwards. This is because all the negative ions are blown off your body. So the more you are out in nature or artificially in the homes, that's why I ask people to get negative ions generators, because in most houses that we have, they're almost only positive ions because of the electric equipment that we have. Yeah, they create no natural negative ions, and they make us sick. Negative ions actually are highly anti-inflammatory, and there are people that say, only since we started using insulated shoes and walked without the contact to Earth, because that's another thing. Our planet Earth is a layer of negative ions, and when we connect to that, we actually charge.
By walking bare feet, you mean?
Walking
barefoot.
Feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or there are now little layers over your mattress that you can put, and then stick it in the socket of your electricity without getting the electricity, but just the earthing attached to it. There are wonderful studies out it, and I give courses on how to earth yourself in daily life. And it makes a huge, huge impact on vitality, just that alone. And there are some people that believe we only started having the chronic inflammatory diseases, and keeping in mind, inflammation is everywhere now. Yeah? If we breathe in toxic particles of fumes, when we're exposed to environmental toxins, our body reacts with inflammation. So we actually need to fight inflammation in whatever way we can. And the easiest way is to get negative ions. So I get people to get negative ions measuring devices, and then go out in their garden, go in the woods, and if you're next to running water or next to a pine tree, this is where many, many negative ions usually are, and just sit there for a while and then charge yourself with negative ions. You feel much more better. And some people that are completely exhausted into the extreme burnout. I actually believe that burnout, the main fact is not just mentally, it is biophysically and especially bioelectrically. We had one case of a woman that was in complete burnout. She literally had to sit in a wheelchair. She was a very successful manager, and she couldn't do anything anymore. And we got her onto an island in the North Sea, where at that time there were no electromagnetic radiation. And within 10 minutes, she was in full strength. And when she went into the next village where Wi-Fi mobile phone towers were, she dropped in vitality and she couldn't move anymore. So we do depend on these natural frequencies. And in my presentation in Bath at the conference, I'll be talking about many, many more layers that are known, not just Schumann frequencies, not just light frequencies, not just magnetic fields. We are surrounded by positive radiations, frequencies everywhere. If you think about, you go in a room and you feel good with the people that sit there, it might have something to do with the electromagnetic field that they're emitting, because the heart resonates up to, you can measure an ECG for up to 9 meters with no big appliances. And they found out in the Heart Math Institute, and that's in the US and in other places, that hearts do get in resonance with each other. Yeah. So if you say, I'm on the same wavelength with you, this is actually the case. Yeah.
So, doctor, just to confirm, because it's virtually impossible to completely escape artificial EMFs, but we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have both the convenience of modern technology and our natural health. Is this correct?
Well, I'm, a few years ago, I would have said no problem. Now I'm not so sure, because I think we exceeded a line that is healthy for us. Yeah, it's all about the amount. I used to go into schools and teach children about the effect of electromagnetic radiation, and it's all measured by energy. It's watts. So you go and you have one candle there, you put your hand on top, that's okay. You can stay there for a while, put 50 candles and or 30 up there, and the heat gets enormous. So now you have all these high-tech devices in schools, and everybody has a tablet, and that has its own frequency. So in one room, you don't have one transmitter, you have 30. And with the addition of all of this, we exceeded anything that I consider healthy. So but as you say, we have the possibility to go via cable. Why do we need to expose the children or ourselves? I give recommendation to all my patients. There are only a few things you could do in order to reduce it, but do it at home. Yeah, that's the last thing that you can be a little bit safer. I mean, we look at all the smart meters and every little device. This morning I was at a friend's house because he started to have all kinds of symptoms that even heart blood pressure problems, arrhythmias, that I usually associate with electromagnetic pollution. And we went into his house and measured, and it was just unreal. Every single device in the house, the oven, the washing machine, everything is nowadays equipped with its own transmitter. And when we turned it off, he felt fine, absolutely fine. But it took us 45 minutes to get through each room and to find out where all these devices were. So yes, I think, because otherwise I'm going to frustrate many viewers if I say it's not possible. I personally live in the middle of the woods because I'm very cautious of this, and I am electrosensitive myself. I do get contractions. I do get headaches. I can't follow conversations when being in cities. I'm very exhausted when I come back from big cities, which everybody is nowadays, by the way. But I try to eliminate it as much as I can, and I start with my home. And I can only recommend everybody, you can use your mobile phone with a cable, put it into an Ethernet adapter. You can use your tablet. You can use almost anything, and just try to find out what emits radiation in your house. Turn it all off for a day and see the difference. That's something I can recommend.
Doctor, where do these safety standards come from? We know that different national regulators, you said that they have different rates of what is considered safe. How do you explain that? What's going on here?
Well, as I was starting to say that they started assessing this in the 80s, and with a few rats, with a few monkeys, and just looked at how much heat was produced in the skulls of these animals when exposed for these short time frames. A lot has happened since the 80s, as you can probably subscribe to, and there's so many more frequencies, and all these science has accumulated, but yet the main regulations by the ICNIRP, which is an association, a private club in the south of Germany with 12 people that don't even have scientific degree in order to assess it. So we very much have to doubt the recommendation that comes from there. And there was in 21 a huge win by Children's Health Defense and another organization filed a lawsuit that all these safety, the Environmental Health Trust, that all these safety levels would have to be reevaluated with non-thermal effects. That was in 21. Nothing has happened so far, but this is where we're at. We can see all the effects that we do have on our systems, and yet there is nothing in terms of all the big organizations. I'm talking about World Health Organization, FCC, and all the other regulated bodies that have changed anything in their limits. And as I said, some countries were a little bit more cautious, and the further you go east, then less you are allowed to emit. Yeah, but it's not only the amount, so the dosage that you have, it's also the interrelationship with all these different frequencies. Yeah, and that's a very tricky thing to even describe. But that's a huge problem in medicine anyway. We only isolate one factor and then test the effect of it. I was just talking to a German professor who has done studies on the mitochondria, and it was not good. It was not looking good. So the power units of our cells do get heavily damaged by any form of EMF, but yet to find a way to publish something nowadays about this subject has become extremely difficult. There's, I was talking to professors that had published in all the major journals in the last decades, and then approached the subject. Their institutes were closed. There were no paper accepted their outcomes. There are severe restrictions when it comes to unwanted.
Why is it not wanted? I mean, this is so important, and it concerns every single one of us. Why is it not important?
I was in a conference in 2019 on 5G, and there was Professor Martin Paul. He's a very eminent, very knowledgeable person in this field. And he told us, with the amount that we have, that's excluding 5G. So he said at that time it wasn't implemented everywhere. He gives humanity about 4 to 5 years. And everybody in the whole conference was shocked. I mean, what a statement to do. Yeah. And I'm repeating it here consciously, knowing that some people will think, well, that aluminum hat nutter, we would certainly know about it. But this is somebody who should know better. And he was one of the reasons, even in the past, why I got very, very cautious in the use of all these technologies. I know we have many interests, starting with, of course, our economy, that you can't imagine without this technology anymore. But think about also state intelligence, also think about military. I mean, the options that you nowadays have with all these technologies, even 5G, which is very questionable why we need it at all. Yeah, that's because so far they're using similar frequency ranges, and the speed isn't that much quicker than we were all told it should be. But yet 5G is being introduced because we need a much, much higher energy to transport it from A to B at every 50 to 100 meters. That's their aim. Yeah. So why do we need this complete, I call it a surveillance technology, 5G, because that's no rumor either. If we can control absolutely the internet of everything, that if we can control it, but we have access to all the information out there at the same time. But that's a completely different topic. But I do think we should discuss, if we are talking about public health, we should talk about both issues. Yeah, and this is clearly lacking. Or have you heard of a public discussion about the health aspects, ethics, and human rights on this topic?
So it sounds like the regulators and international organizations, they are prioritizing economy over human health in this case.
There's no doubt about it. Yeah, we, as I said, 40,000 studies and with influences on every system, body system that we do have. And we were talking about cancer here as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only the inflammatory aspect, it's not only the oxidative stress, which is a precursor. And I was just listening to a wonderful presentation by Professor Mahenkatami, who said that inflammation is the precursor for all cancerous lesions. Yeah.
Christof, I want to ask you, this important topic is one of many that will be discussed by the world's most brilliant scientists, like yourself, at the Better Way conference this June. I'm personally both humbled and thrilled to host one of the panel discussions. So please tell us why about the idea behind this event and why our viewers should watch it.
I mean, as you just could state yourself, that when listening to all the information that we all should know about the effect of EMF, it's just one of many that we don't usually get access to. And that's why we last year had the first Better Way conference in Bath. So we invited people from all over the world, the most beautiful minds, to tell us and to exchange in an open exchange, because in our times, we're mostly presented with one perspective on a topic, and we actually agree to disagree. We can invite people with different perspectives, and we invite an open discussion what science should actually be. And this year, the main topic is going to be about health, freedom, and sovereignty. And we know that all these three topics are under threat in our time. So we invite people to present their knowledge in all these areas and a better way. So a solution to it will happen between the 2nd and the 4th of June. And we'll have 50 amazing speakers from all over the world. And it will be hosted by, I don't know if he's known in your country, but Neil Oliver. He's a wonderful man.
He is a celebrity, for sure.
So we're very happy to have him there. And of course, we're very happy to have you, Veronica, with us. We'll have Dr. Vandana Shiva, James Corbett, Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Jessica Rose, Paul Merrick, Dr. Gary Madej, Dr. Vera Sharef, Professor Olli Johansson, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and the list goes on and on. Beautiful people. And we'll have 8 panels. So the first one will be about big pharma, vaccines, drugs, corruption, to real health, natural health, prevention, purpose, meds, and responsibility. The second one will be because that will affect us all, from fake foods to food as medicine, organic, clear water, etc. Then we'll have artificial intelligence and transhumanism, so vaccine content, smart grid, brain chips, digital ID, privacy agenda, to being human, a sovereign being, and activism. We'll have a panel on electrosmog, and on nature's frequencies. We'll have one on climate change, which includes other controversial topics as geoengineering, and we'll have different opinions on that, presenting their views on this. And we'll have one for control, mind control, digital ID to freedom, with the future monetary system, getting rid of cash, digital identity, digital money. And the 7th panel is from One Health, which includes the plans of a centralized medicine for our planet, which is planned by the World Health Organization, and to alternative healthcare systems that we propose as the World Council for Health. And from Scarcity is the 8th panel, of love, connection, lockdowns, masks, social distancing, to abundance, in terms of creating communities, spirit, courage, and love. So these are the topics, and I hope they resonate with some of the viewers, because I think they're very, very relevant topics. And we will still have tickets on site, but we'll also have tickets available for online access to the conference.
Are they at the betterwayconference.org? Is it the best way to find them?
You got me there. Is that the website? Yeah, that is the website. Yeah.
And where can people learn more about you and follow your work, Dr. Plothe?
Well, I think as you pointed out at the beginning, I'm a steering committee member of the World Council for Health. I do write for them. I do get videos out with several news outlets, which then are presented on the World Council for Health Substack. I'm a frequent writer for that. So if anybody is interested in more, they can always contact me over the World Council for Health or follow what I'm doing by following the World Council for Health.
I truly appreciate your time today, Christof. God bless you. That was Christof Plothe of the World Council for Health. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. I'm Veronica Kirilenko of the New American Magazine.
Hi, I'm Alan Keyes. I'm the host of IMTV's daily talk show about news and events in America. And I want to say a good word for the New American Magazine. Not only because Alex Newman has joined us as somebody who is periodically hosting a show, but because New American Magazine represents an alternative media that is willing to tell people the truth. With so much fake news spreading about, and the fact that right now this country's in an existential crisis, we remember who we are and where we come from and what our principles are, or we die. Reading New American Magazine can keep you up to the minute on the issues that are challenging us as a people and on which that survival hangs. You can check it out and subscribe at www.thenewamerican.com.